There is a person in your life who has been keeping something hidden deep within their heart for far longer than they would ever feel comfortable admitting. This has continued much longer than you likely realized or even imagined. They did not simply wake up one day and discover that their feelings had faded away completely. They did not truly move on in the way their actions may have appeared to suggest on the surface. What actually happened was much quieter and far more gradual than any outward behavior ever revealed to others. They pushed their genuine feelings down because they honestly did not know what else to do with them at the time. They buried them carefully and kept everything out of sight. They convinced themselves that staying silent would be the easier path to follow. But emotions that are buried deep inside do not simply disappear. They remain there in the shadows and grow heavier with every passing day, every week, and every month. They wait quietly until one day all that accumulated weight rises to the surface at once. And that is exactly where this message comes from right now. It does not come from a place of confidence, courage, or inner peace. Instead, it comes from fear, uncertainty, and the painful realization that too much time may have slipped away without action being taken. Something shifted inside them very recently, in a noticeable and undeniable way. Perhaps they came across something that reminded them strongly of you. Perhaps they unexpectedly heard your name mentioned somewhere. Perhaps life finally became quiet enough that the truth grew louder than all the distractions they had been using to suppress it. Whatever triggered it, the experience shook them awake from the place where they had been hiding for so long. One powerful thought landed on them with full force. They may lose you in a way that cannot be repaired later. This realization did not arrive gently. It did not appear during a busy afternoon where it could be ignored and pushed aside. It arrived during late-night hours when everything felt still and heavy. It came during moments when their phone felt silent and empty. Other people's company began to feel shallow rather than meaningful. When the noise of everyday life finally faded away, the silence started asking questions they could no longer avoid. They reached a point where there was no way left to escape the truth. Looking away was no longer possible. That is when they were forced to face what they had been avoiding for such a long time. Nobody else carries what you carry within your heart. Nobody else listens with the same patience you always offered them. Nobody else understood them without requiring endless explanations. Nobody else offered comfort in the same balanced way, providing support without making them feel restricted or controlled. The moment that truth became clear to them, a deep sense of urgency began building inside. But this next part is important to understand clearly. This urgency is not created entirely from love alone. It is also fueled by the fear of losing something valuable forever. Once that connection is truly gone, they know it cannot simply be replaced by someone else. If they could speak openly to you right now, without pride getting in the way, without excuses creating distance between their heart and their words, they would likely say something simple and honest. They should have done more. They should have acted sooner. They believed they had far more time than they actually did. They assumed your care, patience, and understanding would remain available no matter how long their silence continued. What they failed to recognize was that silence carries consequences of its own. Silence has the ability to wound deeply over time. They are beginning to understand that doing nothing is still a choice, and every choice creates an outcome. That choice came with a cost when it affected the closeness that once existed between the two of you. They carry guilt for not being present when their presence was needed most. They carry guilt for remaining quiet when honesty was required. They carry guilt for lacking the courage to express what needed to be said when openness could have made a meaningful difference. At the time, distance felt safer. Silence felt easier. Avoidance felt more manageable. Ignoring difficult emotions gave them the illusion of control. But avoiding painful truths never actually protects anyone from the consequences. It simply delays them and allows them to become stronger over time. This person does not struggle because they feel too little. They struggle because they feel far more than they know how to handle. Opening their heart to you would have required them to accept uncertainty. It would have required them to risk rejection. It would have required them to confront parts of themselves they were not ready to face. Someone once said that until the patterns hidden in the darkness are brought into the light, they continue directing your life from behind the scenes. And when that happens, people often call it fate, bad luck, or unfortunate timing. That is very close to what happened here. Instead of following what their heart was trying to tell them, they allowed fear to make the important decisions. They allowed pride to speak louder than vulnerability. And eventually, they allowed silence to speak louder than either one. Now those choices have grown into consequences they can no longer overlook. There is another layer to all of this that weighs heavily on their heart. They can sense that you are no longer the same person you once were. Something about your energy has changed. Something about your presence feels different now. The way you respond carries a different tone. Even your silence feels different. You may still care about them. You may still hold emotions connected to what once existed. But you are no longer chasing explanations. You are no longer searching endlessly for answers. You are no longer repeating yourself, hoping something will finally change. You are no longer standing in that painful space where confusion controlled everything and uncertainty filled every moment. That transformation unsettles them more than they expected. The reason it affects them so deeply is because they depended on your patience far more than they ever admitted. They leaned on your understanding. They leaned on your kindness. They leaned on your willingness to stay, all while keeping their own heart protected behind walls they rarely lowered. Deep down, they assumed you would always remain there, waiting, understanding, accepting, forgiving. They never truly imagined you would eventually reach a point where you chose yourself. But you did. And they feel that shift clearly now. That quiet decision you made speaks louder than any argument ever could. Because arguments still contain attachment. Arguments still contain emotional investment. Arguments still reveal that someone is fighting to be heard. But your calmness now feels different. Your calmness feels like acceptance. And that possibility forces them to confront something they never wanted to face. The possibility that your life may continue moving forward without them. For a long time, they believed there would always be another opportunity, another conversation, another chance, another moment to explain themselves, another day to finally say what remained unsaid. Now they are no longer certain those opportunities still exist. That uncertainty follows them everywhere. It appears during quiet evenings. It appears during moments when they see something that reminds them of you. It appears when memories surface unexpectedly and bring back emotions they thought had disappeared. The memories are not dramatic. In many cases, they are surprisingly ordinary. A conversation, a shared laugh, a familiar phrase, a simple moment of understanding. Those memories carry weight because they remind them of something rare. They remind them of being seen. They remind them of feeling understood. They remind them of a connection that never fully left their heart, no matter how hard they tried to convince themselves otherwise. And now they find themselves standing between two powerful emotions: regret for what was not done, and fear of what may never return. Neither feeling is easy to carry. Neither feeling allows them much peace. Part of them wants to reach out immediately and say everything. Part of them remains afraid. Afraid of how you might respond. Afraid that too much time has passed. Afraid that the version of you they once knew has evolved beyond the place where they left things unfinished. Yet despite those fears, the truth continues pressing against the walls they built around themselves. The truth continues asking to be acknowledged. The truth continues demanding honesty. Because some connections leave an imprint that cannot simply be erased through distance or silence. Some people remain present in the heart, even when they are absent from daily life. And whether they are ready to admit it openly or not, that is the reality they are beginning to face now. For the first time in a long while, they are no longer focused on protecting themselves from uncomfortable emotions. Instead, they are being forced to examine the cost of remaining silent. They are being forced to look honestly at what fear has taken from them. And perhaps most importantly, they are being forced to recognize the value of what they once had before they assumed it would always be there. That realization has arrived with tremendous weight, and once certain truths become impossible to ignore, life rarely allows a person to return to the comfort of pretending they never existed in the first place. Keep paying close attention, because this is where the truth becomes even more direct and unmistakable. What they are afraid of losing is not only you as a person in their life. They are afraid of losing the rare experience of being truly seen without being judged harshly for what is revealed. They fear losing the emotional safety they never fully admitted they depended on so heavily. They fear losing that uncommon space where they could feel understood without being pressured beyond their personal boundaries before they were ready. Only now are they beginning to realize that not every bond can be repaired once it has been allowed to fall apart. Not every meaningful connection can simply be replaced by someone new who enters their life later. Some people leave an impact that cannot be recreated, no matter how hard a person tries. This realization follows them wherever they go now. It appears during quiet moments, when there is nothing left to distract them from what they have been carrying inside. It rises whenever they attempt to move forward, yet struggle to find stable emotional footing beneath them. It returns every time they compare another person to you and immediately recognize a difference they cannot explain away or ignore. That is why the urgency growing inside them continues to become stronger with each passing day. It is not about trying to control you or reclaim influence over the situation. It comes from the realization that time is no longer something they possess in endless supply. They can feel a door slowly beginning to close. Not with anger, not with dramatic words, not with some final declaration. It is happening quietly in the background, almost unnoticed. Yet that kind of quiet closing is often the most serious of all. When a door closes gently within someone's heart, it rarely opens again with ease. This person wants to reach out to you now. They want to find the right words. They want to explain themselves honestly. They want to offer an apology that carries genuine meaning instead of sounding empty or defensive. Yet fear interrupts every attempt before it can fully begin. Fear keeps asking whether it is already too late. Fear keeps whispering that perhaps you no longer care the way you once did. Fear keeps reminding them that showing their true self could lead to rejection that cuts deeply. Because of that, they hesitate. They hold their words back. They create messages in their mind and then erase them before they ever have the chance to send them. They imagine conversations from beginning to end that never actually take place. They examine every possible outcome they can think of and still remain exactly where they started. While they continue delaying, the pressure inside them continues building with no real release. This is not a promise that everything between the two of you will suddenly resolve itself. It is not a comforting fairy tale. It is not a guarantee about what the future holds. It is closer to an honest confession spoken across distance and time. They are not claiming that all the damage has already been repaired. They are not pretending they suddenly discovered every answer that was missing before. What they are finally admitting, even if only in their private thoughts, is that treating you as though you would always remain there waiting was unfair. They failed to recognize your true value until they experienced the emptiness left behind by your absence. When truth arrives this late, it brings extra pain with it, because it arrives together with the realization that something deeply important may have already slipped away. Yet what this means for you matters far more than what it means for them. Pay attention to this part carefully. This is not encouraging you to stand still and wait. It is not asking you to forgive before you genuinely feel ready. It is not asking you to return to the same uncertainty and pain you have already endured. It is simply revealing the truth they failed to communicate through their actions. You mattered to them far more than they ever knew how to express. Your absence feels louder in their life now than your presence ever seemed when you were there every day. What existed between you was real, even if they handled it poorly at the time. The true power in this situation belongs entirely to whatever decision you choose to make next. Real power does not rush forward simply because someone else suddenly feels desperate. Strong desperation does not automatically mean genuine readiness for change. A person can feel overwhelming regret and still not be capable of offering the consistent care and emotional responsibility that a meaningful relationship requires. Right now, this person is sitting with the honest consequences of who they chose to be when it mattered most. Consequences have a way of revealing truth clearly. They strip away comforting stories. They remove excuses. They expose what silence truly cost everyone involved. They have been revisiting old memories recently, memories they once believed were too small to matter. Now they see those same moments through the lens of loss, rather than the comfort of pride. They remember the small things you did without expecting recognition. They remember how you checked on them for no special reason. They remember how you could sense their mood before they even spoke a word. They remember how you held yourself together even when they unexpectedly pulled away. They remember how you consistently moved toward understanding rather than rushing toward blame or anger. Those memories weigh heavily on them because they reveal something difficult to accept. You met them at a depth they had not yet reached within themselves. At the time, they withdrew from the emotional growth and responsibility that meaningful connections require. For a long period, they convinced themselves that distance was a form of protection. Now that same distance feels far less like safety and much more like exposure. Even through the silence that exists now, they still feel seen by you. Yet your silence has changed. Where it once felt temporary, it now feels lasting. Where it once felt like a pause, it now feels like genuine distance. Where it once suggested another conversation might happen soon, it now feels like life continuing without any clear expectation of return. That difference affects them more than they would ever openly admit. They can sense that you are no longer building your emotional world around their uncertainty. You are no longer waiting for them to reach the place where you have already been standing. You are no longer arranging your life around their mixed signals or confusion. That realization awakens an even deeper fear. Not only the fear that you may reject them if they reach out, but the fear that they may no longer hold the same meaningful place in your life that they once did. They worry that you may have quietly closed the chapter without anger, without confrontation, and without needing any final explanation. That kind of calm can be frightening to someone who became accustomed to your availability, especially when they relied on that availability without truly earning it. Another important realization is beginning to take shape inside them now. You never expected perfection from them. You never demanded that they become someone without flaws. You never asked them to have every answer. You simply wanted them to show up when it mattered. You wanted honesty instead of avoidance. You wanted effort instead of silence. You wanted sincerity instead of emotional distance. You were not asking for impossible standards. You were asking for presence. You were asking for truth. You were asking for consistency. Only now are they beginning to understand the difference. And that understanding carries a weight that grows heavier every day they continue looking back at what could have been done differently. You wanted steady consistency instead. You were never asking them to completely transform who they were at their core. What you truly wanted was for them to live according to the values and qualities they often claimed to have. Now they can see with uncomfortable clarity how many times they reached for comfort when courage was what the moment genuinely required. They repeatedly told themselves they were not ready yet. They created reasons for their silence and explanations for their distance. They found justifications for why the timing never seemed quite right. But readiness does not simply appear on its own one day. It does not arrive when life finally becomes convenient. Readiness is a choice that must be made deliberately and acted upon. When you offered honesty, love, and genuine presence, they did not fully meet you there. They held part of themselves back. They remained guarded when openness was needed. That realization hurts now because the opportunity no longer feels the same as it once did. They can sense the change in you clearly. It shows in your voice. It appears in the pace of your responses. It reveals itself in the fact that you no longer work so hard to prove your value to them. It lives within the quiet confidence that has settled where longing and reaching once existed. That shift changes everything about the situation. For a long time, they believed they had endless time because you consistently showed patience and understanding. They confused your patience with permanent availability. They interpreted your care as a promise that you would always be waiting according to their timeline. What they forgot was that patience has limits. Eventually, self-respect rises. Eventually, clarity arrives. Eventually, a person stops placing themselves second. Now they find themselves caught inside a difficult internal conflict. They want to move toward you, yet they do not want to begin something they are uncertain they can sustain. They want to offer a meaningful apology, yet they worry about making promises they may struggle to keep. They want to restore closeness, yet they understand that closeness requires effort, responsibility, and consistency. So they remain suspended between two opposing forces, between wanting and avoiding, between reaching forward and retreating backward, between the pull toward you and the familiar habit of staying distant. That is why their energy feels uneven, conflicted, and restless lately. Their heart points one way, while their actions still move another. They imagine finding the courage to step forward. They imagine discovering exactly the right words. They imagine showing up as a stronger and better version of themselves. But imagining is easy. Living it is much harder. Living it requires something real. It demands repeated actions. It requires commitment over time. It asks for proof rather than promises. This is where fear tightens its grip most strongly, because deep down, they understand something important. Words alone will no longer be enough. You are no longer waiting to be convinced by beautiful statements. You are watching for what remains consistent. You are paying attention to what lasts. You are looking for actions that continue long after the conversation ends. That does not mean your care disappeared. It simply means you became stronger. You learned how to sit with sadness without allowing it to define you. You faced disappointment honestly. You stopped avoiding difficult truths. You allowed reality to become clear. They are only beginning that same process now, and timing matters more than they expected. Growing through loss feels very different from growing while love remains safely within reach. They understand this, even if they struggle to say it aloud. They know that even if they finally speak now, what once existed cannot simply return unchanged. That realization frightens them, because what they miss most is not only your presence. They miss the version of you who trusted freely, the version of you who believed wholeheartedly, the version of you who offered your heart without hesitation. Trust does not automatically return because someone finally finds the right words. Once trust changes, it changes the shape of the entire connection. Because of that, they find themselves standing at a crossroads. Behind them is the familiar comfort of hiding. Behind them is avoidance. Behind them are old habits and familiar excuses. Ahead of them is honesty without protection. Ahead of them is vulnerability. Ahead of them is accountability. If they remain where they are, they risk losing you completely. If they move forward, they must face parts of themselves they spent years avoiding. That is something they resisted for a very long time. What you have been sensing is not confusion without reason. It is not something imagined. A genuine shift is taking place beneath the surface. Deep underneath everything else, a quiet truth has been growing stronger. Loss does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives softly. Sometimes it appears as emotional distance. Sometimes it reveals itself through subtle changes in someone's energy. Sometimes it arrives as a feeling that something important is slowly slipping away. They feel that quiet truth now whenever they think about reaching out. They feel it whenever they picture you moving forward peacefully. They feel it whenever they imagine you building a life filled with clarity rather than uncertainty. That image unsettles them deeply. Not because they wish anything bad for you, but because they realize they may no longer be central to the future they once assumed they would remain part of. There is nothing they can do to easily stop that realization. They cannot stay busy enough to avoid it forever. They cannot distract themselves from it indefinitely. For perhaps the first time, they are confronting what fear has truly cost them. For a long time, they resisted their feelings for you. They resisted the responsibility that comes with emotional presence. They resisted vulnerability. They resisted openness. They resisted softness. Now all of that resistance has nowhere left to go. It has become pressure building inside them, and the pressure continues growing. They are not only afraid of losing you, they are afraid of what losing you reveals about themselves. At a deeper level, they understand this was never simply a matter of bad timing. It was fear. Fear of being fully seen. Fear of not being enough. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of loving deeply and failing. Fear of not knowing how to care for something meaningful without accidentally damaging it. Again and again, they revisit moments when they could have spoken, moments when honesty was possible, moments when courage was available, moments when a different choice could have changed everything. Those moments seemed small at the time. Now they feel enormous. Now they carry weight. Now they return repeatedly. You did not suddenly vanish from the connection. You slowly adjusted to what they consistently showed was available. You stopped carrying the entire emotional burden yourself. You stopped filling every silence with hope. You stopped sacrificing your own peace to keep the connection alive. Those changes happened gradually. There were no dramatic announcements, no major declarations, no final confrontation. Just a series of small decisions that slowly moved you toward yourself again. They can see that now. They notice you no longer depend on them in the same way. They notice their moods no longer influence your choices as much. They notice their uncertainty no longer controls your emotional world. Yet what affects them most is your calmness. Calm often feels more final than anger. Anger still reaches outward. Anger still hopes to be heard. Anger still carries emotional attachment. Calm carries acceptance. Calm suggests reality has been acknowledged. Calm suggests someone may no longer be waiting for circumstances to change. They understand confusion. They understand mixed signals. They understand